Brexit.
Brexit means Brexit.
The soundbites.
No deal is better than a bad deal.
The lies.
They lied about the costs of Europe. They lied about Turkey's entrance to Europe.
The fallout.
I do object to being called a Nazi.
For 2 years now, the establishment has been trying to deliver Brexit. But with no plan, Britain voted to leave the European Union. But will we even leave at all? Imagine a world where Britain, as we know it, no longer exists.
The only way to avoid no deal is to vote for the deal.
The fallout over Brexit ripped the establishment apart.
As what my right honourable friend says, and what my right honourable friend does, no longer match.
The government fell, and there was no opposition to take over.
Do you think there should be a second referendum? What do you think?
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? What's the question going to be?
What would you?
The BBC and all other forms of mainstream media shut down.
I'm a Democrat. I don't know about you. I don't know about you, Andrew, but I'm a Democrat.
Don't try and patronise me. I'm as much a Democrat as you are.
I certainly wouldn't try to patronise you.
Anyway.
I'm sure you would never try and patronise me.
It wouldn't be a war, a nuclear bomb, or a natural disaster that would destroy the country, but a conversation, a topic, a discussion, a debate, a vote, a protest, a riot, division, and incompetence. It seems like a far-fetched tale of a Netflix sci-fi fantasy. It seems like government propaganda to get us Brits into supporting a deal which has the UK still being a diminished, vassal, subservient member of the European Union. But then you have to take into account the current state of British politics.
If we as a country decide to quit, then we're out for good. There's no going back.
We wouldn't have a seat at the table. And if we wanted to trade in the EU, the other countries could put on tariffs and taxes. When the head of Europol, who's a Brit, says we're safer in the EU, I listen. When the head of MI5 and MI6 says we're safer in the EU, I listen. And when all of our major allies, America, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, say we're safer in the EU, I listen. And if it comes to a choice, to listening to all of these people, even if they're experts, or listening to these three about who keeps my family safe, I'm going to vote for them every single day of the week and twice on a Sunday.
Remainers have always said Britain leaving the European Union would give it less of a place in the world, being less economically secure and powerful than it would be in a close tie to the EU.
The European Union was a noble dream in the last century, but today it has failed. It has turned into a nightmare.
We are the world's fifth biggest economy, and most economies can agree free trade deals within 2 years. The European Union is taking 10 years or never at all. Why? Because 28 member states cannot even organise a takeaway curry, let alone what they're going to do on free trade with the rest of the world.
You heard earlier that the Prime Minister was meant to have got a deal. That a deal amounted to absolutely nothing. It's temporary.
If we vote leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Leavers have always said that Britain is more than just an economy. Britain voted to leave the European Union, and therefore we must enact the will of the people. Because although our industries are always for sale in world markets, our hospitals, our schools, our culture and our people cannot be bought and sold. So Brexit was just the tip of the iceberg of a much wider debate worldwide. A debate on sovereignty, democracy, trade deals and immigration. But here's the problem. Like any political debate, there is always at least two sides to an argument. Remainers versus leavers, the economy versus democracy, Britain without the world versus the world without Britain. So inevitably, an entire scale of opinions about the European Union erupted out of the Brexit debates. There are those that want to end free movement of people altogether.
The Immigration Minister Brandon Lewis said it was a simple matter of fact that free movement rules would no longer apply after Britain leaves the EU.
And those who are fearful of the impact that would have on their businesses and the economy.
But recently, her hotel business has run into some problems. Most noticeably, she has a tough time hiring new staff.
There are those who want to remain in a customs union to allow tariff-free trade with the European Union and no friction at any border, including the Northern Ireland border.
Labour would seek to remain in a customs union with the EU and within the single market.
While there are others who want to leave it because a customs union means we cannot make trade deals with nations outside of it. There are those that want to remain in the single market and therefore keep the economy as closely tied to the EU as it possibly can be. But then, there are those who say there would be no point in leaving the EU if we were still part of the institutions we no longer had a say over running, which led May into coming up with her Chequers proposals.
And our proposal will create a UK-EU free trade area which establishes a common rulebook on industrial goods and agricultural products. This will maintain high standards, but we will ensure that no changes can take place without the approval of our Parliament.
It was meant to be a compromise, to appease both sides and unite the country. It ended up dividing the country more. She proposed a common rulebook to keep the country tied to similar rules of the EU, and therefore avoid any friction at the border.
Northern Ireland would effectively remain in the customs union and parts of the single market, permanently separated economically from the rest of the UK by a border down the Irish Sea.
But it still wasn't enough for the EU to not impose a hard border in Northern Ireland, and it angered many Leave voters because Britain, under that deal, would still be under European Court of Justice law. Then, when Theresa May actually reached a deal, came another hard-hitting blow.
Losing Northern Ireland would be the price the UK would pay for Brexit.
Because the common rulebook wasn't enough for the EU to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, they had to come up with an Irish backstop, which meant the UK would have to remain in a customs territory and Northern Ireland had to remain in a form of single market. All because they needed to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland.
On one issue, the Northern Ireland backstop, there remains widespread and deep concern. As a result, if we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin. We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
She then delayed the vote, hoping to get a legally binding reassurance on the deal to avoid Britain remaining in a permanent customs union. She failed. In fact, Brexit has seen nothing but failure on all sides. Labour campaigned for Remain. They failed. Labour tried to hold a leadership challenge. They failed. The Conservatives tried to find a new leader. They failed. May tried to trigger Article 50 herself. She failed. May tried to win an election. She failed. Labour and everyone else tried to make gains in the election. They failed. The SNP tried to get Scotland to be an independent country. They failed. May tried to create a Brexit parliament to deal with Brexit. She failed. The Labour Party tried to get another election or a second referendum. So far, they failed. The Conservatives tried to oust May. They failed. May tried to appease both sides in her deal. She failed. Everywhere you look, you can find an element that has gone wrong for everyone. Whether it be this...
Your dad won't answer the question. Your daddy's a totally horrible person. Go. Lots of people don't like your daddy, you know that. No, he's probably not told you about that. Lots of people hate it. Because he won't say how much he pays. You know the man who looks after him, daddy doesn't pay her very much. Daddy says the minimum wage doesn't count for anything. Or the London living wage.
Or this.
I must run out of time, so I want to ask you another question. I'm many things, Owen Jones, but I'm not naive.
Well, no, can we just say The Spectator is a classic example?
Yeah, I knew you were going to bring that up, and I won't let you hijack
No, it's not about hijacking, it's about The Spectator.
Your smears and lies about me are not going to be dealt with tonight, so just move off
We're going to talk about the media.
I'm not going to let you hijack the BBC to do this. It's got nothing to do with it.
Or even this.
This is a bit about the Syrian refugee Jamal who had his throat grabbed in the school up in Huddersfield. I now have it as absolute fact. I've seen images of the young girl that he was involved in beating up.
So that leads many to the conclusion that Brexit is to blame and therefore we must reverse or stop Brexit. But Brexit is not to blame for Brexit. You may think that there is no logical way the UK can avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, leave the single market and customs union, uphold the economy, unite the country, limit immigration and leave the EU all at the same time. One of those areas, surely, has to falter, and you might be right. But there are benefits Brexit has already brought, even without a deal.
Because a decade after the financial crash, people need to know that the austerity it led to is over and that their hard work has paid off.
The supposed end of austerity, a promise to control immigration. The collapse of power of the mainstream elites, the end of globalism, power to the people, and the opportunity to take some big risks. I've always said it will probably get worse before it gets better. But more importantly, because we have to resolve this and nobody knows how to, I believe we could find a way. I think we will leave the EU, but it might not be the exit we want. But I'm not certain about anything, and that's why the establishment has failed us. Their job was to deliver policies, vote on policies, and use the media to sell those policies. But they can't do that anymore, and that's why they failed. Brexit meant Brexit, but nobody knows what it means. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.